The MUA has always been a leader in the domestic violence space, right back from when the Women's Committee used to raise money for local shelters by selling white ribbons. I acknowledge Sue Virago and Karen Wheatland, the two previous women's officers who led the way in getting buy-in for the White Ribbon campaign with our union leaders. The officials embraced it and took it to a globally respected level with Mick Dolman leading. It was great to have Jerry and Leslie Diaz here from Unifor this week. Unifor was the first union in the world to implement a women's advocate program that created a workplace domestic violence contact officers across Canada. In workplaces like Ford and Chrysler and other male-dominated manufacturing workplaces, they had dedicated women's support officers for domestic violence. Through the work of the ITF Women's Committee, we have rolled out the Women's Advocate Program across the globe. We have campaigned to get the ILO Convention C-190 on violence and harassment in the world of work adopted. Now we are campaigning to get governments to adopt the convention. Now we need to make sure that we do more. We need to make sure that we include domestic violence leave in every EBA we negotiate. The ASU runs a campaign called We Won't Wait, and for years they've been calling on the federal government to put 10 days paid domestic violence leave in the National Employment Standard. The federal Liberal government rejected it. We ended up with 5 days unpaid leave. We've tried to pull together a list of domestic violence clauses in MUA EBA since the last conference. The list that we have at the moment is around about 200 EBAs, so it's not all of the EBAs that have been done since then. But of those 200, there's 144 EBAs had no domestic violence leave clause in them. 21 had the minimum unpaid, that is the National Employment Standard, and 40 had higher than the National Employment Standard, paid leave, 40. Some of those agreements and some of those clauses are well above and beyond what we've got in our template clauses, and I acknowledge the officials that have fought for those agreements. Some are unlimited paid leave for domestic violence. If a person needs to get out of a violent home, they need to be able to keep their job. It takes money to leave, doctors, lawyers, new house costs, and so much more. From this conference forward, I'm asking delegates here not to sign off on an EBA with a company unless there's a domestic and family violence leave clause in it. This is part of our Equality Charter. This is what we stand for, this is what we fight for, this is what we believe. And now it's time to stand up and tell every employer out there that they will not get an enterprise agreement with the MUA unless there's a domestic violence leave clause in it. It's been 2 weeks since the horrific murder not far from here in Camp Hill, Brisbane. The murderer got in his car of his estranged wife and 3 children as they were preparing to drive to school. He doused them in petrol and set them on fire. He got out of the car and stabbed himself. Hannah Clarke and her children, Leanna, 4, Aliyah, 6, and Trey, 3, were all killed that day. Today we remember them and the 9 other women that have died as a result of violence this year so far in our country. The footprint on the screen is the only part of Hannah Clarke's body that was not burnt beyond recognition. Too often these things happen and we are shocked and we're disgusted and we're angry and we're sad, and after a week we've forgotten about it. Today we're worried about fucking toilet paper. I don't want us to forget stories like this, stories that happen in our own home, our neighbourhoods, up the street. Understanding domestic violence is so important. It's not just physical, it can be emotional, verbal and financial. At first, even though a woman has experienced violence in her home, she could be surrounded by people that tell her that you deserve this, or you're lucky you have someone, or at least he says he's sorry afterwards and gives you flowers. She might have family members that tell her it'd be wrong to leave, she has to think of the kids. And when that leap is made into the unknown and she and the children leave, she might have well-meaning neighbours that say, well, it's better the devil you know than the devil you don't. It's a great injustice in our country, as wealthy as ours, that we have people escaping a situation like that are forced to sleep in their cars. I remember a story years ago of a woman who left a violent home with her kids, and she would drive around the car around at night. It was in Canberra actually. And she would get them to count the kangaroos until the kids fell asleep in the back, and then she'd find a place to park, probably near a public toilet, and fall asleep herself exhausted. Such incredible courage, such heartbreaking stories. It abuses, it takes. Domestic violence systematically, not accidentally, disempowers and degrades. And yet we are told, better the devil you know than the devil you don't. They mean well. There is no alternative. Time and time again, it's better to stay for the sake of everyone, for the sake of peace, for the sake of our future, for the sake of our family. But we know that the struggle for equality against inequality is ultimately, like that woman, a struggle for liberation. The struggle is long, but so is our desire for justice. Delegates, please join me in committing to making sure that we have domestic violence leave in all MUA EBAs from this day forward. Thank you.